All right, Coach Fitz. What comes to mind when you think Coach Fitz?
Just his personality. I don't think you can match that personality anywhere. You hear people walking down the street, hey, do you know Fitz? How's he doing? They're checking on him all the time, and it was just his personality, I think, that stuck out for everybody.
My first game at Gonzaga, going as a fan, was in the 90s, and I got to see him coach, and he'd turn all red, and he'd stomp around, and he was fun to watch as a coach. What was he like as a coach, from a player's perspective?
Well, I saw a couple perspectives of him as a coach. Number one, as a freshman, his theory was the only good thing about freshmen is they become sophomores, so it kind of gives you an indication of where I stood in his book right then and there. But in the years that passed, after he turned over the reins to Jay Hillock, he was always willing, and he came back and tutored me if I was looking for extra work in the summertime or ways to get better. He always had those answers, and that went all the way through my NBA career. I could always call on him, and did quite often, to, hey, what's wrong with this? What's wrong with that? Very knowledgeable on the game. NBA guys call all the time to ask his opinion, and I think that shows kind of where he was at with the game. Very smart.
I saw some earlier interviews. We were going through some old tape today with you, and some earlier interviews where you talked about even when you were in the NBA, you'd come back and you'd work with Coach Fitz. What did he do that helped you so much?
He just had a way of seeing things. I think when you ask somebody for help, sometimes you get their picture of what they want you to do, and what Fitz did for me was he folded in what he thought would improve me without necessarily changing a whole lot. Little tweak here, little tweak there. Hey, take a look at this. Think about that. Specifically, one time I remember asking him, so we're having trouble finishing in the paint, particularly going to the left. And as I was getting older, those were more difficult things to do. And he came up with some options that really helped me in the latter years of my career.
Your relationship changed probably a lot with him. From he was your coach, and then afterward, friendship. I mean, how did that relationship change?
You grow up. As a young boy, I sat and watched him coach the Bulldogs, and saw how animated he was, and sometimes looked crazy on the bench. And then he recruited me, and that was an interesting process all in and of itself. And then I played for him for a year, so I experienced in that. And then everything after that, it was just a friendship that grew over time. And I think as a player matures, that's one thing we get to benefit from. We get to be around these great people and learn from them, and then get to be their friends as we grow older.
A lot of people say, Coach Few has talked about it, no matter where he goes in the country, people say, hey, how's Fitz doing? Did it ever surprise you how far his hand reached that way?
Yes and no. Sometimes it surprised me, be walking down the streets in New York City and somebody say, hey, how's Dan Fitzgerald doing? But then it doesn't. If you know his personality and you know how welcoming he is and how he's willing to chat with everybody, sometimes for long periods of time, then you can see how that could happen.
You talk about his personality, and we see, when we watched him coach, a fiery personality, but yet when you meet him as a man, very warm personality. Can you describe his personality?
It's pretty hard. I think that if you were of Irish descent, then you just say he's a typical Irishman, and that makes perfect sense to a lot of us. But to those who aren't, I don't know how to describe him. Very outgoing, very friendly. He's chatty. And I remember when we were driving around as freshmen, we were in the Bay Area playing San Francisco or somebody, and he's driving the car. We took rent-a-cars back then, and you'd swear that he was never looking at the road. He was always looking back to convey a story, using both hands often and looking backwards. So we survived those, and those were good times.
You get the phone call that you didn't expect. What was that like? What went through your mind first?
Disbelief. My dad called me, and I said, no way. Fitz is the type of guy, he's a scrapper that you kind of felt would live forever, and even though you think about him all the time, you never think you'd had to rush to say anything to him, because he'll be here, he'll be around, and so that's going to be the hardest part looking forward, is that he isn't.
When you look back at Coach Fitz, are you going to remember the coach or the man more, do you think?
Oh, easily the man. Yeah, even though he helped me so much as a coach, more as a tutor later on than as a coach. X's and O's, playing the game on a given day, but the man, definitely, he was a loyal friend, and never let me down, ever.
A lot of Gonzaga fans think that Gonzaga basketball started in the late 90s, but he pretty much laid the groundwork for what we see today. Do you consider him the guy that got it going? I mean, along with you and your teammates.
Well, I wouldn't put. I think Fitz got it going, no question about it in my mind. And I know that '90s is when that big boom happened. They hit the stars with that group, and but you can't get anywhere without the foundation, and Fitz was the foundation for all of us.